know how much of detail I'm going to read in this document because it's not a document standalone of it in and of itself. This is the document that is both referenced during and is corrected after the struggle session you're about to watch and that I summarized before this video. It has the initial demands that the organizers had, and then Wendy's response, and then their response to that. And it's not Wendy's response during the meeting, it's mostly her initial response from her document of the response. But there is a few things mentioned in here that happened during the meeting that is within the organizers' responses to Wendy. That was a confusing way of paraphrasing that. But I thought at least having a space where this document can at least be shown and slightly read is probably preferential for people who don't want to watch the struggle session and just kind of want to see how the organizers are thinking about these demands. So the first one they talk about is the land, not even just the land acknowledgement, the giving back of native land. And how they phrase it is that if the institutional land cannot be returned to Native nations, Haverford College should provide free higher education to Native students on their traditional homelands as land-based reparations. And then I don't believe in the first iteration of Wendy's response. I don't think this is recognized as demand because this part of the Native Nations part, the Native Nations comment was in their open letter, which they read in one of the other, or they read, or was in the documents sent out of the demands. So it wasn't necessarily, it was said we demand in there, but it wasn't listed in the official demand sheets. And then our response and deadline. You speak a lot about BIPOC. You know what the I stands for, correct? In light of the stolen land Haverford is built on and continues to illegally occupy, by what legal standard? Isn't our legal standards based on... Oh, whatever. Haverford College will establish a reparations program for any descendant of Native peoples originally to Pennsylvania state territories. The college continues to profit off the romanticized story of the Penn Treaty Elm in their admissions programming and through on-campus tours. Following the model of this university... have a reparations program no later than January 29, 2021. Haverford will officially announce that any individual of descendants of this Native people will be given preferential admissions considerations at Haverford College. And then full scholarship, yada yada. So 2, we would like President Raymond to immediately resign from her position as Chief of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The position is better left vacant than held by someone wholly unqualified for the job. By what standard is she not wholly unqualified? She's been working in equity and diversity work for over a decade. I believe she was one of the first, equivalent diversity officer, or at least led of a committee for diversity in one of the past colleges she worked at. She's been working at this stuff farther than you guys have conceptually been talking about this political aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then Wendy's response. As the president, I will convene by December 1st a CDO advisory group of students, faculty, and staff to recommend the best way forward for the CDO structure for Haverford. Yes, as a reminder, Wendy's position originally was still just an interim basis for 2 years as they figured out how the CDO was going to function. If it was going to be someone has a double role, so they're both a dean and this, or if it's going to be singular, or if 2 people will have that role, something like that. And then the response is, our deadline. This does not meet our demand. Wendy must resign immediately regardless of the current hiring freeze. We are also deeply uncomfortable with your role in choosing the successor of this position and ask that you release a public apology for self-appointing yourself for this role as a white woman. The students on this advisory group should be included in the decision-making process as to who is hired. Responding to the changes made by President Raymond at the meeting, we request that rather than appointing another chief of DDI without any student feedback, that the position remain unfulfilled until proper student consultation has been taken into account. The same committee of students that will be in charge of hiring the chief of DEI will be tasked with implementing the funding approved for this position. That's a lot of power just for students. You guys don't even work at the institution. Election day and Wednesday. Thank you for your commitment to this demand. We demand academic leniency for BIPOC and our FGLI students who are traumatized by the effects of COVID and constant police violence in their communities. Wendy's response mentions AOR, CAPS, Writing Center, all these things. I will ask our task force on retention and persistence to devote a portion of its research work to learning more from these students' experiences. Dean Joyce Bylander, Provost Linda Stromley, and I will engage with faculty and deans on long-term structures as well as immediate efforts to create fail-safe means of support for BIPOC and FGLI students. Some of this work has already begun within both the dean's office and FAPOC, focusing on reorganizing of support structures and changes to the language and resultant framework of CSSP, respectively. Our timelines is deadline. To the educational policy heads, Provost Linda Strodlink and Chair Melise Boltz, we ask that you give full transparency to the community on the actions to reform taken by FACSP and CSSP, and we expect this to be released before Thanksgiving break. Openly admit that the CSSP put people on academic warning as a result of the spring semester and acknowledge that the decision does not reflect trust, concern, and respect immediately. I still don't understand that point of, like, they talk about how the CSSP released academic warnings to people during the spring semester, and because there was the credit, no credit policy and other things, it was inappropriate for them to release those letters. But I would think those letters are just automatically sent. Like, there's a certain grade, and then CSSP releases that warning, like an automatic sender thing. I don't know. That is an assumption on my part. But I still don't understand the need for apology, because they're just doing their job, even though, yes, it was a very extreme circumstance where maybe there should have been more flexibility. But I don't know. Wouldn't that be in the individual instance where someone got that letter and it wasn't appropriate, that they would then go through a process with whatever professor of the class that may have gotten them that warning to follow through with it? Doing a broad help of that category does not seem like it would actually be efficient for the students' needs, like the individual students' needs in that category of these people who got academic warnings. Put in place a framework within CSSP to allow academic flexibility petition or a similar petition for unforeseen events or trauma in a student's life to be taken into account when the student is up for review before the close of the semester. They're also just asking for, like, another form of not accountability, another form of accommodation that is not needed to be professionally reviewed by a doctor, because, like, that was one thing where it's like we have to have certain types of things signed by doctors or some kind of person, and we can help pay for that. That's one of the Harvard's caveats of, like, oh, if you can't get it, we will help you go through the process to get that accommodation. To move on. 5, we demand that the school encourage and protect student participation in supporting direct action. Harvard College is a nonprofit institution, mentions CPGC, Philadelphia Justice and Equity Fellowship Program. While I understand the desire to have Harvard demonstrate its commitment to anti-racism through charitable contributions to worthwhile causes, this is not an avenue the college will take. Our timeline is deadline. To the Board of Managers, we ask that you commit to opening institutional funds to student groups who are providing needed resources to students in the BICO and residents in Philadelphia. Commit to providing, an example being BICO Mutual Aid. That would still be donating to another technically not classified nonprofit, because I don't think the BICO Mutual Aid went through any kind of paperwork to have any officiated status, which I don't really care on that point. But in the point of a bureaucratic body that has a certain process they got to go through, or else they could be legally investigated for bad means, doing that, that still is under they can't do that because the nonprofit thing. Commit to providing student groups who engage with activism in Philadelphia funds available to support people on the ground in Philadelphia and provide these groups access to campus vehicles and supplies. You must do this by January 29th, 2021. There should be no reason that the college cannot provide funding for student initiatives dedicated to uplifting and planning with activists in Philadelphia. If it's not within the educational mission of the college, they do have a right to step back. That's why they mentioned the CPGC, which is something that can connect with a college and figure out a fellowship program that aids in this work. Yes, in a bureaucratic matter, and that's the thing that they don't like about it, because they want it to be a little more, I guess, free structure, but they can just ask for money, show them this little framework they're going to do in this college, be like, yeah, cool, here you go. And they go on with it, which is very idealistic. And I guess I wouldn't say it's like hopeful or good, because I want to assume the best on my best part of these people, that like they do have these groups, maybe like food pantries if they want to help, and maybe they don't have the funds, but it's still, that is a weird shaky ground to ask for college funds to go to that specifically when they still have an educational mission they have to fulfill as their status of a institution. 6, we demand the institution recognize and resolve that the increased surveillance and policing among students in regards to COVID-19 private students is talked about. Okay, the college does not currently have data that point to bias against BIPOC students with the campus efforts to monitor and respond to health, safety, and COVID. I've asked my colleagues in the operations planning group to evaluate and revise our monitoring response systems. Our reiteration. It is disrespectful for the president to maintain the position that the college does not have data pointing to bias against BIPOC students when BIPOC students have been profiled by campus safety. They're not saying students haven't been profiled. They say they don't have data, as in someone went through the formal process of talking about the incident, or enough students. They may have like 1 or 2 on hand, but 1 or 2 instances is not enough to be able to put a huge initiative with a lot of budget. There has to be some kind of accumulation in the data process or the data collection process that proves that. They're not saying the individuals have not had this experience. They're saying that they have the experience. However, we don't have formal data, so it's hard for us as an institution to step forth and do something. Working with Tom Kean, we expect the college will make COVID-19 reporting data publicly available by Thanksgiving break. We also expect Tom Kean to order campus safety officers to end profiling only Black residents of Ardmore and preventing them from using the campus while white residents are given the benefit of the doubt, especially considering the amount of wealth Delco residents routinely breaking the natural trails restrictions throughout this pandemic. That's also one of those points that's like brought up a few times, but it's not brought up in a way that there is something, and I have to speak like this, something quantifiable for the college to be like, okay, yeah, this is happening. Like you're showing this video footage of like people walking around and then they're not being stopped and these ones being stopped because the institution needs something like that to make an institutional measure for it. While exasperated by the COVID-19 restrictions on campus, this practice of profiling Black residents of Ardmore has been a long issue. Again, the school looks like don't have data pointing to that. Can't say it's not happening, but to demand them to put forth some kind of institutional mechanism, they have to go off of something. We're going to move on to the next one. We demand Harvard honor and credit the work of Black women driving institutional change instead of taking credit for their continued labor and erasing their contributions. And then when he says, yes, of course, I wish to always do that. Our timeless is deadline. When talking about the three-pronged approach to making Harvard an anti-racist institution, cite your sources. Time and time again, President Raymond has used the demands outlined in BSR5's open letter as her platform for promoting anti-racism, but fails to acknowledge the majority of Black women as a part of BSR5 that gave President Raymond the necessary demands to enact action in this institution. There's only one incident that the organizers make public of this happening where it's not that BSR5 wasn't credited, they just weren't credited by name. It's in their preluded timeline, or the prelude timeline that I covered, where they specify, like, in the article that Wendy published in early September about what they're starting to do, they say a group of students under the name BSRFI, and they split the whole name. And the organizers state that they didn't name the organizer by name. So this time and time again, you have to now bring up your sources and cite your receipts, because I have not seen any of the documents of Wendy, at least not crediting students or saying that students have helped this work. May not be specific, but that's still giving credit to something that's not yourself. Again, that goes into the not enoughism. So they're not even saying it's like they haven't been being credited, just they haven't been credited in a certain way. President Raymond focused on the way that BIPOC alumni could be remembered at Harvard, but did little to explicitly recognize the groups of organizing doing the work. President Raymond failed to thank these groups. Wishing and being mindful is not enough. And speaking of Black women, Dean Bylander and Provost Linda Stronlich, who, Linda, for many of us, this is our first time seeing and appearing to be multitasking with eating on this call despite the seriousness of this meeting, we call on the Black women leaders of this campus to also step up. Please stop weighing administrative's interest over Black students. We need you to step up to the plate for Black women. For Black women with a specific belief and morale of what should be right and wrong. Again, this hiding behind the identity when your beliefs should be looked at as beliefs. They may be tied to experiences you've had, but clearly what's being shown is that these other women who are of your identity, who also probably have similar experiences to you in discrimination and violence in America, seem to have a little more of a calmer stance in some of these things. And that's completely, sorry to use this word, valid. You need to directly collaborate with Harvard's library activists to ensure institutional memory exists. A project time must be set no later than December 18th, and set a digital archive must exist by the end of academic year. The institutional memory thing does actually exist. Harvard, on there, I believe they're just like their anti-racism website. You can scroll down. It has all these documents. It has all the stuff from the strike. It's institutional memory right there publicly. We demand the school creates a framework to deal with problematic professors and generate space of accountability. The honor code is not enough and never has been. And then I'm not reading all of that, but it's basically saying, we will put in procedures for people to talk about faculty and all that. When will the provost do all of this? We need to hear from Linda and Rob specifically. You provide no timelines regarding these redundant, ineffective communities and drawn out conversations. Maybe it's because the committees and stuff have to talk before they even have a timeline. Like there's an initial conversation that has to happen. Additionally, this response only really discusses issues between faculty, not student interactions with faculty. Students are bound to the social honor code, whereas professors are allowed to get away with discriminatory and harmful behavior for years because there is no serious problem for students to hold them accountable. The college will put in place a formal, direct process intended to hold professors accountable for specific instances of discrimination, as well as for cultivating a generally discriminatory classroom atmosphere, including but not limited to a racist, sexist, homophobic, classist, elitist, transphobic, or sexually predatory environment. The reporting process will specifically allow students the option to identify themselves or remain anonymous, but in either case, each submission will be reviewed and considered. A body will be formed to receive these reports, elected entirely by the student body and composed of 50% students, 20% faculty, and 20% administrators. Students will be compensated for this work. This body will not be punitive, but will instead communicate concerns to a given professor, making concrete recommendations. Oh god, that sounds like an actual small Lindsay Shepherd struggle session. Will provide communication to these persons of the incidences. Should there be multiple reports across multiple semesters, however, the few changes on the professor's behalf, a formal report will be made to the provost. There's an answer to one of the FAQ questions in the document that like lists examples of, I guess, microaggressive behavior or something of professors. And if that's the standard, that these professors can be brought into this interrogatory meeting, I can understand hesitance in not creating this because it's very, very, and I'll use this word in your favor, nuanced. Very, very nuanced. Because what if they have a class one year where they say a comment that's like that and everyone's fine, and then next year there's a student that doesn't like it? So then we're going into like a relative morality here of like certain things being offensive to certain people of a group, and then the same person who was in that group not being offended by it. Oh my goodness. Oh, there's more to that. We're just gonna continue. We demand that the school continue to pay. And by the way, as I've specified before, this whole thing is talked about in the actual meeting. So me scanning over some things, it's not me hiding anything. It's all in the open in the meeting that you can watch fully if you have the stomach. We demand that the school continue to pay the students who participate in the strike. We need a firm commitment that students who refuse to show up for work throughout the duration of the strike will continue to be paid. Again, if you reach our attainable demands, there will be no need to hold up students' pay. If you didn't strike, you're the one striking. You can't say we're striking and our demand in here is money. And if you just follow our demands, we won't have to talk about the money issue. That's such a weird negation of responsibility. You're going to get 20 hours of compensation for striking. You're striking against the administration and they're still offering like, oh, you can still get 20 hours. They don't have to legally offer that for you anything because you're striking. Oh my goodness. We demand that no students, staff, or faculty participating in the strike face financial, academic, or professional retribution of any kind. We need a firm commitment, not up to individual faculty, many of whom have already weaponized unruly biased powers against BIPOC faculty students in their classrooms, as we previously addressed. We need a firm commitment that students who have been participating in the strike will not receive any academic penalties. The admin is not a totalitarian regime over faculty. They're not. And this is something that's specified as early as the response to the BICO thing of like, we cannot make Wendy and some of the admin cannot make all the decisions. There's faculty input. There's faculty freedom. Faculty freedom is a big thing that's been fought for by many faculty, many colleges in the history that we've had colleges. We demand that the BICO stop its violence against disabled students. Yeah, this one's a long one that we're going to skip for now because, again, it's covered in the future. We demand robust aid and support for queer and trans students of color. We approve the measures taken to allow students to visit off-campus therapists. No details. Yeah, nothing there. Oh, I don't know. Oh, these are green because they were technically edited and added during this point. So we demand that the college terminate all relationship with the Lower Merion Police. The LBT exists solely to protect capital and perpetuate terrorist violence against those whose trauma and oppressive the capitalist system profits from. If the college truly supports the health of Harvard students, Lower Merion Police, and Philadelphia area citizens whom the college continues to exploit on numerous fronts, then it is in its best interest to end all relationships with LMPD and other police departments. This includes any police department we have previously hired from and called on extra judiciously. It is unacceptable that we are forced to repeat ourselves on this front, especially in light of the egregious harm police officers have brought Harvard students in the recent weeks and long before. We demand an entirely new, renewed Black Cultural Center. The House current states illuminates the neglect and lack of priority the House faces, which is a direct reflection of how Black students on campus are treated by the larger community. Black students, as well as the House, are seen as disposable and only have a purpose when the college wants to parade donors to the House or publicize the students. Black students on this campus need an entirely new building created with their best interest in mind, rather than a building that has hastily constructed due to previous Black student dissonance in the 1970s. In solidarity with the Latinx peers and have then they continue to raise their work, we also demand a Latinx Center. And I believe those are at least the process of that is approved. Isn't like they were like, we'll talk about envisioning this space. We can't say when it'll be made because we don't know what it will be. And of course, that kind of is, I believe that is taken as an offense of like, well, you don't believe what it'll be, and these people are demanded it, and it should have already been here, and there already is a Black Culture Center here, and it's been neglected, and that reflects how you've been neglecting Black students, even though we don't really have any proof of anyone going. Well, actually, I think Heifer does have proof of where they went up to ask for repair, and then a person came in, and instead of repairing the thing, I think they just replaced it and made a cabinet, like there was like a malfunctioning stove, which that does sound pretty sketch. I could be confusing that with Bryn Mawr, but like that. If there is multiple instances like that are documented, then I will accept the organizer's proposition that the Black Culture Center has been either neglected or had really sad management from people who are just like, we're not going to fix this. We're just going to make it a cabinet. But that is the document that, again, it comes up again when we look at the full spreadsheet that Wendy's next response to these is. There's like a smaller spreadsheet, and then it expands, and then there is a fully updated version that's like, it kind of condensed things down into principles, like how Bryn Mawr did their framework. But that's for the future. Enjoy the struggle session if you can sit through it.